Our next speaker is Camille Nerrière. She's going to be speaking to us about. Are you going to speak in French?
Or in English.
In English. One second. The title of her talk is Putnam and Scientific Activity and Practice, and we should be ready any second. Voilà.
So today I will talk about Putnam and his conception of science activity as a practice, as my title stated. Before I start with the problem I want to examine today, I will start with some preliminary remarks. The first things I wanted to say is that sometimes we understand Putnam as a philosopher of science, and it seems that we can accuse him of not taking into account history of science and science as a practice. And that's what I wanted to examine today, because historians of science sometimes look unfavorably on philosophy of science, because this discipline is often seen and understood as picturing science in an idealized way, or even worse, as using science in order to demonstrate philosophical theses, and especially metaphysical ones. In other words, philosophy of science is often accused of not taking into account the way science develops itself, or I should rather say, the way sciences often develop themselves. And for example, a paradigmatic example of this kind of accusation is the scientific realism debate, for example. So the main aim of this talk is to examine some Putnamian arguments, which has often been understood as a defense of scientific or even metaphysical realism. And my aim is to show that the real question behind the Putnamian considerations is, as Epps say in rule following realism, the real question is how to give an adequate picture of our scientific practices. And more precisely, my aim here is to re-examine some arguments in the debate between conventionalism and Putnam's externalism, to show that, once again, the real question is how can we give an adequate picture of our scientific practices and take them as a starting point for our reflection. So first, I will sketch the problem behind conventionalism, the debate between conventionalism and Putnam externalism, or I should rather say the problems, because actually there are three problems that articulate them. So First of all, there is an understanding of this debate I would like to reject. And just as a matter of simplification, now I will talk about externalism, but by externalism I will mean Putnam externalism, except if I precise it. So, roughly understood, the debate between conventionalism and realism is often understood as a disagreement about the role of science and about the status of theoretical terms, where the classical question seems to be, do our theoretical terms refer to and capture real entities? Are they useful tools to make predictions? Again, it's a roughly characterization of this debate. But if we understand Putnamian arguments this way, it seems that debates the questions, because as it is often said, we can't access the reality science is supposed to capture independently of the description given by science. But again, maybe it's more the aim of my talk. If we understand the question this way, it belongs more to metaphysics than to philosophy of science, because it belongs to the metaphysical debate about realism. So the way I understand the debate between conventionalism and externalism, again, Putnam's externalism, it deals with several problems we have to understand conjointly. So the first problem is the question of the meaning of the theoretical terms. Again, it's roughly described because it's more subtle than that, but conventionalism, as it is understood often, affirms that the meaning of our theoretical terms is given by the theory. We can think, for example, of Carnap conventionalism, where the theoretical terms are implicitly defined by a set of rules in a formal language. For a theory, we want to reconstruct in its this formal language. And connected to this idea of implicit definitions, there is the idea that there are analytical sentences, which gave us conjointly the definition of our theoretical terms, and also which state all logic and or mathematics. So in this conception, the analytical sentences are the rules of formation and semantic rules of our language and their consequences. On the other hand, externalism affirms that the meaning of our theoretical terms doesn't change through theoretical change. And that's the first problem. If we understand conventionalism as affirming that all terms are defined only in a formal language, it seems that when we change our language, the meaning of our term changed. On the contrary, externalism affirms that the meaning of our theoretical terms doesn't change through theoretical change. So in other words, there is a continuity of meaning through our different theories. And the problem is then, what is the cause of this continuity? Is it that our words refer to entities, kinds, species, entities in the world about which we made new discoveries? So that's the first problem in this debate, the meaning of our terms. Is it defined only by rules in formal language we built to reconstruct our theory, and then we have a problem, it seems we have a problem to understand continuity? Or is the meaning or does the meaning doesn't change through theoretical change and is the same through different theories. So it's the first problem. And as I said, then we have to answer the question, what is the cause of the continuity? So the second problem is the problem of disagreement, and more precisely, the problem of continuity and disagreement. If the meaning of our theoretical terms are only given by the theory they appear into, it means that, it seems to mean that if there is a theoretical change, we don't mean the same thing. We can take, for example, the term gold, used by John Locke, and used after the discovery of its chemical composition. If the meaning of gold is given by the theory, it appears that probably we doesn't mean the same thing with our word gold than a person who used gold before the discovery of its chemical composition. So again, if we accept, we can say, an entire theoretical continuity of meaning, we can avoid this problem because we can make sense of the idea that we mean the same thing as a person using the word gold, before the discovery of its composition, atomic composition. And the third problem linked with this debate is, do we know what we mean? It seems that another problem appears if we accept the idea that there is a continuity of meaning across our theories. It's that often we understood externalism as presupposing that reference is a strong relation between words and objects or kind. And the problem is, maybe it will mean that we didn't know what we really mean with gold before the discovery of its atomic structure. In other words, how can we make sense of the fact that we seem to know what we mean if, again, the meaning is given by the discovery we can make about the kind or the species it refers to. So it seems that if we accept externalism, we have to accept this weird consequence that we can discover what we mean, and again ignore what we really mean. So we can articulate these 3 points in order to state the problem, and we can sum up the problem in these terms. Either we accept that there is a continuity of meaning, but we have to consider the possibility of discovering what we mean, or, on the other hand, we consider that the meaning is given by our actual theory and change, of course, when our theory changes. So we know what we mean with our theoretical term, but then we can hardly make sense of disagreement. Because the problem is if the meaning is only given intra-theoretically by the rules of the language, it means that if we disagree, we don't accept the same theories, then we don't speak about the same things. So it seems that there is no real disagreement. So in other words, conventionalism seems to entail that disagreement can be considered only intra-theoretically, which is also a problem. So my aim here is to examine this dilemma to show that if we understand properly, Putnam's suggestion and Ebb's in-depth study, we can dissolve this dilemma if we take our scientific practice and the point of view of participants in this scientific practice seriously, and if we take it into account. So as a starting point, we can examine the analysis Putnam gave in his article, the analytic and the synthetic. And in this article, Putnam analyzes the statement E equal half mv squared. And the question is, can we consider this equation as analytic, as it has been considered like an analytic statement? This question is, of course, linked with the problem of conventionalism, because conventionalism is often understood as presupposing or saying that E equal half mv squared is not a natural law, which was abandoned, but a definition which gave the meaning of kinetic energy in modern physics. According to Putnam, there is a problem if we consider E equal half mv squared as a definition of kinetic energy in modern physics. Because if we consider that it was a definition, and as E equal half mv squared has been abandoned in relativity, it means that the word or the expression kinetic energy has a new meaning. So, in other words, it means that we don't talk about the same thing, and that we have changed the meaning of the expression kinetic energy while abandoning modern physics and adopting relativity. But again, if we don't talk about the same thing, it means that we don't really disagree. So, in other words, conventionalism seems to entail that when we switch to a new theory, we change the subject and we don't really disagree with the older one. And from the participant point of view, it seems awkward to consider that there is no disagreement about kinetic energy, and that there is only a pragmatical disagreement about the choice of the theory. Because again, if disagreement can be possible only if we share some rules to state the disagreement, and as the rules are given only in a theory, there can't be real disagreements between theories because there are no shared rules. So, as there can't be real disagreements, theoretical disagreements between different theories, the consequence is that a change of theory is only a matter of pragmatical choice. What is important is, if we want to understand this article, is that it seems that Putnam's example is not truly as an argument. Of course, an example is never an argument, but again, we have to analyze what Putnam wants to do with this example. And it seems that it's more a way of remembering familiar aspects of our practice. We tend to consider that there is a disagreement about what is kinetic energy between classical physics and relativity, that there is a real disagreement. We tend to consider that there is a real disagreement. But we can't make sense of this if we accept presuppose that E equal half mv square is an analytic definition of kinetic energy. And if we consider that there can't be real disagreements between divergent theories. If we consider the problem in this way, the solution seems simple, but we have to keep in mind why we can be tempted to consider, or why Carl-Appians, for example, can be tempted to consider E equal half mv square as an analytic definition. And as Epps in rule following in realism put it, there is a Carl-Appian insight that can explain why we can be tempted to consider it as an analytic definition. And this insight is that we can make sense of a disagreement only if we have explicit rules to state this disagreement, unless it is pure squabble. So that's the insight between one of the insights. Of course, there are other, but one of the insights behind the idea that we have to state explicit rules to make sense of a disagreement. But again, the problem is who can we give an adequate description of a practice or scientific practice? And in this article, Putnam tries to make us remember of the fact that there can be discussion and disagreements, even if at the beginning we don't have explicit rules to state our discussion, that we will find a way to disagree, even if at the beginning we don't know how to state our disagreement. And if we take this idea seriously, then we will have to consider that there are trans-theoretical terms as kinetic energy, for example, which refer to kinetic energy, even if we change our theory. But then it seems to be another problem we have to examine. What does it mean to say that the expression kinetic energy refers to kinetic energy? Do we have to presuppose a strong relation of reference and a metaphysical realism, according to which there is something in the world that is kinetic energy, and that our term fixed. So even if at the beginning it seems that Putnam tries to remember us of or practice in our scientific practice, does this example, to be properly understood, presuppose metaphysical realism? So we have to ask another question. What does explain the continuity, and that in some way we can consider a theoretical term like kinetic energies, as trans-theoretical terms. So the question we have to examine right now is, as I said, do we have to presuppose metaphysical realism in order to make sense of this continuity? And if there is the presupposition behind Putnam example, it seems that the intuitiveness of the idea of continuity, given our actual practices, is in some way threatened by the necessity of endorsing metaphysical realism. So we can look again at the famous, maybe two famous Putnam's thought experiments of thin Earth, to see if there is other arguments or if there is an answer to this problem in this article. Well, as this thought experiment is well known, I will just briefly sketch it, and I will go directly to the last step of this thought experiment. So, briefly, Putnam imagined a twin Earth similar to our Earth, except the fact that water is not composed of H2O, but has a more complex molecular structure, abbreviated in X, Y, Z. And on the last one, the last step of this thought experiment, but now imagine this situation. Let's imagine Oscar living on Earth and his twin, not his twin brother, but his twin Oscar, how can we say that? Oscar living on twin Earth, we will call him Oscar twin Earth. And let's imagine them living before the discovery of the molecular structure of water. Oscar and his twin would have the same beliefs about the thing we call water. Nevertheless, Putnam maintains that the extension of the word water on Earth is the same as it is today, namely H2O, and that the extension of water on twin Earth is the same as it would be today on twin Earth, namely X, Y, Z. So even if Oscar and his twin had the same mental states and the same beliefs, they didn't mean the same thing with the word water. So it's the last step of the thought experiment. And the question we have to ask is, does this imply that an ulterior scientific discovery can determine what we mean now? And this seems to be the consequences of what Putnam calls the contribution of environments. A naive lecturer would consider that we introduce the word water in the presence of a sample of a kind we call water, and then it's up to the world to determine the reference over time. It's the naive lecture of the contribution of environment. And then science will help us to discover what we mean with our word water, while we discover the structure of the kind we refer to and we introduce a name for. But as Epps points out in his book, Rule Following and Realism, we have also to consider what Putnam called the division of linguistic work, and we have to understand the contribution of environments conjointly with the division of linguistic work in order to understand properly what is the contribution of environments. So just after the exposure of the twin Earth thought experiments, Putnam introduced this idea and sorry. And so that there is a quotation taken from the meaning of meaning. And this quotation is really important to understand this article because it can clarify the way we have to understand the contribution of environment. The idea is that our shared interests and continuous ordinary practice are, in other words, it is, this quotation says that it is our shared interest and continuous ordinary practice which determine what matters to be a sample of water. And more precisely, it is our shared interest and continuous ordinary practice which determine that what matters to be a sample of water is to share a specific molecular structure. So, in other words, the idea is that we use the word water as a natural kind term. And that is why we can discover after, scientifically, what is this natural kind. But again, it is our shared interests that determine what we mean with a word water. This quotation is interesting because it imagines that there would be no common physical characteristic except the superficial one. And if we have discovered that, maybe because of a shared interest, we would have taken water to be not a natural kind term, but referring to a substance which have only superficial characteristic which determine that it is water. So again, what is important is the persistence of our shared interests, and the persistence of our shared interest and our scientific practice, common scientific practice, can explain the continuity without presupposing any kind of realism, metaphysical realism, I mean, because our shared interest and persistent practice determine what we are talking about when we use our vernacular term, water, and then it's determine what we can discover, or that we can scientifically discover something about a reference. So the main point here in this argument is that again we have to take into account our ordinary practice and and the fact that it's linked with the scientific practice, and it may help to understand the continuity of meaning without presupposing any metaphysical realism or even a strong relation of reference. What Putnam thought experiments show is that our ordinary practice and shared interests fix what would count as a sample of water, a sample of a substance with a certain molecular structure. But again, this is determined by the fact that we use water as a term for a natural kind. That's what explains why we can make some scientific discovery about it. So we have to distinguish two things in order to clear up the objection that externalism would entail that we would discover what we mean. Saying that we can discover things about the reference of a term doesn't mean that we will discover what we mean. It's two different things. There is a minimal understanding of the word water shared by all participants, and this minimal understanding that again allows some scientific discovery about the reference. How many time do I have? Okay, so I will only consider an example and then conclude. Even if we discover that water is composed of H2O after we start using the word water, it would not mean that we didn't know what we mean. We would only discover new things about what we call water. So to conclude, Putnam's analysis in its twin Earth experiments remind us of the importance of taking into account our scientific practice, and even it seems our ordinary practice and shared interests, because that is what can explain the continuity of meaning across different theories. It is because science is understood as a practice that we can understand the continuity of meaning. And again, Putnam invites us to reflect on our practice in order to provide the most faithful picture of science. And if this lecture suggests that it is an error to consider that we have to understand this argument as a way to defend metaphysical thesis. It seems rather that it states an aim for the philosophy of science to take into account and to take seriously our practice in order to properly understand it. Thank you.
Perhaps we have time for one or two quick questions.
Yes, obviously, there's something that I don't understand in Putnam. So if we accept that science practice is the solution for your kind of reason, the problem is if you take water, gold, kinetic energy, you have a simple task because the fact that nobody denied that they existed. Okay. Let's say that. If I take deep logistical, which are theoretical terms, things that we don't think exist at all. And we're studying all the black line, it's not English, but in noir. You know, this kind of stuff, which were theoretical terms, stabilized by practice in the history of science, but nobody believes that they exist anymore. So, I mean, maybe something. So I do understand what would be. I mean, I think that we need more, and I think Putnam has other argument for these cases, but I think we need more than stabilization by practice.
I didn't hear everything, so. But I didn't hear the last example.
But I mean,
Okay.
Les terres, la mémoire, logistique, des exemples classiques de termes théoriques, une façon d'arriver. Voilà.
Well, I think that yes, this example and these arguments are meant this argument can provide analysis for the terms which are vernacular and theoretical terms. And the way I understand this example and this analysis is to examine this objection that even if we use the word water through centuries, we didn't mean the same thing. But I agree with you that I don't think that these arguments can be applied or without any adaptation to theoretical terms, which are only theoretical terms like ether or
Yes, your talk was very interesting and keep the problem of continuity in time, but maybe wondering about the problem of continuity in space. So can we apply such a solution to, for example, two cultural eras correctly? When we have to translate, for example, some theoretic terms from one cultural era to another, in such practice, stabilizing practice which make continuity between the two cultural eras.
Yes, that's a question, and it's a problem. But now tries to think, and I think that we can practice is not linked to a language. We can translate a language into to another. But this is a question if we have radical different practices, and probably we will have to consider that it's not the same terms. Sorry.
Thank you, Camille. We now have